You may recall that last week the economic crisis signaled the start of a bad, gaffe-filled, no-message, angry week for the McCain campaign. After the weekend, they showed how they intended to recover. On Monday, they launched their first TV ad trying to tie Barack Obama to Tony Rezko and the, quote, corrupt Chicago machine. Tuesday was the Wall Street Journal's turn to dredge up Obama's long-ago work with William Ayers. And today, ads are reportedly running in Michigan linking Senator Obama to Reverend Jeremiah Wright and to Kwame Kilpatrick, the disgraced ex-mayor of Detroit. The group's next ad, according to today's New York Times, will highlight Obama's support for a Kenyan politician. Franklin Raines, Reverend Wright, Kwame Kilpatrick, the Kenyan Prime Minister. You think there's a point they're trying to make here? McCain folks may know something I don't about how effective these ads will be, but strategically it's important to note that this guilt by association lowball opens the way for a return volley. And in the middle of an economic crisis, if the McCain campaign is opening the door to shady associations, don't we go instantly to the Keating Five?
And now to Washington, D.C. and government. Hearings begin this week into what is already being called a major congressional scandal. It involves the $500 billion savings and loan bailout. It is about charges that 5 U.S. senators tried to protect one S&L owner who had contributed to their political campaigns.
John McCain was one of those 5 U.S. senators. Now he calls the entire episode a, quote, very unhappy period in his life. When Chicago Mayor Richard Daley first heard the McCain-Rezko ad this week, he said, quote, when you start throwing mud, mud is going to start being thrown at you, and it's going to be sticking. So timing-wise, I think it is fair to say that John McCain's full stop to his presidential effort today comes as he found his campaign in perhaps quite a vulnerable place. Joining us now is Matt Welch, who is the editor-in-chief of the libertarian publication Reason Magazine. He's also the author of McCain, Myth of a Maverick. Matt, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us about the Keating Five. Who was Charles Keating, and what was his connection to John McCain?
Charles Keating was a freak of nature, a 6'5" former Navy pilot turned anti-obscenity crusader, and most importantly for our discussion, he was John McCain's first single most important political backer when McCain dropped into the state of Arizona for the first time of his life and ran for Congress. He was responsible for about 1/3 of McCain's full campaign fundraising for his initial congressional career, and introduced him to sort of the rich society of booming Phoenix, Arizona, at a time when McCain needed all the connections that he could get. McCain ended up having quite a long and very close relationship with Keating, to the point of traveling to his resort in the Bahamas 9 or 10 times on Keating's private jet. Keating was the owner of American Continental Corporation, which owned Lincoln Savings, which was incidentally my first bank. And back in the 80s, there was a real estate boom. Sounds kind of familiar. There was a lot of new financial instruments that not everyone quite understood. Interest rates were low. A lot of eerie similarities to our situation right now. And when the worm turned, as all housing bubbles and other bubbles inevitably do, Lincoln Savings was the single biggest culprit of the entire episode. When it went belly up, it cost taxpayers $3 billion alone. Keating spent 5 years in the federal pen, and 20,000 pensioners lost their life savings.
You mentioned the real estate boom, the new financial instruments that people didn't necessarily understand, the multi-billion-dollar taxpayer bailout of the institution. There are a lot of similarities here. What about what John McCain got in trouble for? What his association with Keating was more than just personal.
Yes. In 1987, 5 senators, John McCain, Alan Cranston, Dennis DeConcini, Don Regal, and McCain, all met with federal regulators who were investigating Charles Keating and Lincoln Savings for a variety of violations, some of them quite serious and criminal. They met with regulators on 2 separate occasions saying basically, hey, can you hurry up your investigation? What's the status of it? Those kind of meetings were very, very unusual. The regulators, investigators felt pressured, and they immediately turned around and reported that to the House and the Senate right at the time that the savings and loans were going belly up in the late 80s. These meetings happened in 1987, but the savings and loans really became sort of a crisis in 88, 89. Right about that time, these stories percolated of these improper meetings, and so there was a super long Senate ethics investigation into those 5 senators to see whether or not they delayed the investigation into Lincoln pension savings, and therefore delayed sort of justice happening to the people who suffered under Keating's misrule. Eventually, they came out and basically slapped John McCain and John Glenn on the wrist, accusing them of poor judgment and nothing else. The other three senators received more serious sort of smacks in the behind, if you will. McCain was the only one to remain in the Senate for more than 6 years. Three eventually did not run for re-election. I think John Glenn did. And McCain, which he's described as the lowest point of his life, lower than even his prison time in Hanoi. After that, he became a big reformer of the campaign finance system, which got him in trouble in the first place.
Matt Welch, editor-in-chief of Reason Magazine. I have a feeling this topic is going to be getting you a lot more bookings in the future. We expect you'll be back to join us. Thanks for joining us.